Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as we start, I hear a point about something not before us here today. Amazon, as I'm sure many of you have seen, the Wall Street Journal has recently reported that Amazon has potentially changed its algorithms in order to favor its own products rather than to actually report what consumers are looking for. I've raised concerns about this publicly. Amazon responded to me this morning and said there's absolutely no truth to any of those reports. So, Mr. Chairman, I've invited them to come to this committee. I'm sure you'd be happy to have them. And Amazon, you can come here to this room. You can sit at that table. You can take an oath. And you can answer our questions. And you can open up your books so that we can all see. And we invite you to do so. We'd love to, I'm sure, love to have you here. So we look forward to Amazon's response. I'm sure they have nothing to hide. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I have to tell you, just to put my cards on the table, I'm concerned about the state of antitrust enforcement. As somebody who believes in competition, who believes in free and open markets, and thinks that competition actually is good for American individuals, American families, and American consumers, I'm concerned about what I see as a pattern of lack of enforcement, pro-competition enforcement. And I understand that both of you say that your respective agencies need more resources. Until we can figure out some of these structural problems that you both alluded to, I don't know why we would spend more money to do things that frankly aren't getting results. Chairman Simons, let me just begin with you. I want to ask you about the FTC's recent settlement with Facebook, company you now say you're continuing to investigate. That settlement was $5 billion, is that right?
Correct.
Now, Facebook's revenue last year, I believe, was $56 billion, so the fine was worth less than 9% of Facebook's revenue. Is that right? Am I getting those figures right? Did you interview Mark Zuckerberg during your investigation?
No.
Did you interview Sheryl Sandberg during the investigation?
No, but we had their email.
Did you ask to interview them? Either of them? Did you interview other major executives?
I believe so.
Who?
I don't have a list. I could get it for you.
You can get it for me, great. I'd love to see it.
I think it would have to be pursuant to a non-public
You know, I'd be happy to get any information I can get out of the FTC, so we'll take it in whatever format that you're able to give it to us. Let's talk about Google for just a second.
So can I say something about Facebook?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Facebook was a situation in which we were faced with either taking the settlement that you described, which was $5 billion, and a huge very significant injunctive relief as well, and comparing that to what we could have gotten in court. And if we had gone to court, we would have spent years litigating, and if we had won at the end of that, we would have come up with something that was far less. The court, we have to go to court, and a court would have to award what we were looking for, and a court would have given us far less, both in terms of the civil penalty, the $5 billion, and also in terms of the injunctive relief. So
well, I'm interested you say that because I noticed that your agency it doesn't take a lot of cases to trial. In fact, you don't usually go through the adjudication process on very many cases. Isn't that right?
We have a lot of litigation. We have a lot of litigation on the competition.
You settle most everything, don't you?
Well, that's true of every enforcer.
So that's a yes, though. I mean, here's my question. What I see from your agency is frankly a culture of paralysis. I'm tempted to call it a culture of capitulation, and I worry about agency capture. I just wonder, is there something, I don't have the answer, but is there something structurally problematic at the FTC? I mean, what is it that the FTC is really doing with its time? I mean, I think it's fair to ask. And I don't know the answers to these questions, but I think that it's time that we ask them. I don't know why we would authorize more personnel and more money for an agency that doesn't seem to be vigorously enforcing the laws. Now, you both have talked about the overlap in jurisdiction. Maybe we should clean up that overlap in jurisdiction by removing it from one of your agencies. I mean, what do you think about that? Would that be something that would make the process better? Mr. Delrahim, let me ask you to give you the chance to weigh in here. I mean, should we clearly designate enforcement authority to one agency so that we don't have these clearance problems and this seeming lack of enforcement we've been seeing?
Well, as an administration official, I don't have a view on that, but I think it's perfectly an appropriate area of inquiry for this committee to take a look at the overall system that we have in this country. I mean, I was privileged to serve as a commissioner on the Antitrust Modernization Commission. There were a number of recommendations in that 10 years ago, or 12 years ago now, that were there. But that was one of the very small areas that we looked at, but there's a number of areas of inquiry that I think are worthy of your attention.
You know, we're reading now in the press about these fights, these interagency fights. Chairman alluded to them earlier. You know, I'm concerned that these turf wars are leading to a lack of enforcement. I mean, that you're not able to actually get after the business that you should be getting after, doing the job you should be doing. And again, maybe it's time for this Congress to do something about it. Let's come back to something else I wanted to ask you about, Chairman Simon. I read somewhere that 2/3 of FTC commissioners and bureau directors go on to work for or represent the tech giants. That can't be right? Is that right?
That's not a statistic that I've seen.
Would you, if that's accurate, would that concern you? I mean, why would that be the case? Why would that be happening?
Well, my sense is that the people, like, so for myself, for example, so I represented people who were against the big tech companies. So I represented a bunch of companies who were trying to challenge Microsoft back in the late 1990s. So it could be on either side of the spectrum. So I don't think it's necessarily one way or the other.
Well, at the end of the day, I think that we're seeing structural issues play out in the press. We're seeing a troubling lack of enforcement, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Google. You know, I think of the fact that we know from a leaked FTC memo report that Google had an internal policy, this is a quote, to bias ourselves. That's Google talking in their own algorithm. The FTC, I think, had this report as early as 2012, yet didn't take any action. Meanwhile, the EU fined Google $2.7 billion. So I don't know what the answer is here, but I think that it's pretty clear we have a problem, and it's pretty clear from what we're reading in the press about the relationship between your entities that we have a problem. And I think it's time, Mr. Chairman, that we addressed ourselves to solving it. Thanks so much.